The hum of voices around me in the conference room was a familiar sound, almost comforting. I glanced down at my phone, expecting a brief distraction from the unrelenting buzz of business discussions. It was a little ritual I'd gotten into during the day, checking messages, sorting through emails. But this time, the screen lit up with a name I hadn't expected, one I'd almost forgotten about. Tyler. I stepped out into the hallway, needing to escape the clattering sound of corporate jargon and forced pleasantries. The floor beneath me felt cold and sterile, and the hum of the air conditioning above added to the detachment I felt from the environment. For a moment, I paused, trying to gather my thoughts. This wasn't how I expected the day to unfold. "Hey," I answered, a familiar chill creeping into my voice. "Hey, it's Tyler," he said, the smoothness of his voice almost cutting through the air like a blade. I hadn't heard from him in days, and something about his tone made me tense. It was too calm, too controlled. I had expected some small talk, an inquiry about my travels, a routine check-in, something casual. But instead, Tyler didn't waste any time. "I'm divorcing you," he said, the words landing like stones in my chest. Took a moment for them to sink in, but when they did, the weight was heavier than I anticipated. It wasn't anger that hit me first. It was disbelief. He was speaking so casually, almost smugly, as though he were delivering some inconsequential piece of news, as though I was just another casualty in his plans. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my throat felt tight. "I've already sold the apartment, so you'll need to figure out where you're going to live." "Enjoy that," he said, his voice dripping with a cold kind of satisfaction that I couldn't quite place. I stood there in the hallway, feeling the world around me disappear. The laughter from the meeting across the hall, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, even the chill of the marble floors beneath my feet. All of it blurred into a haze. Couldn't breathe. Not from the shock, but from the sheer audacity of it all. This wasn't the Tyler I had married. Or at least not the one I had thought I knew. "You sold the apartment?" My voice was barely a whisper, as if asking again would somehow make it more real. "Yeah," he replied, a dry laugh following the word. "Nicole and I need the money to set up our life together. She deserves better than a tiny place like that anyway." Nicole. That name stung. I had suspected something for months. The late nights, the sudden trips for work that never seemed to add up, the tension between us that had grown so thick I could cut it with a knife. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him speak her name so casually, like I was the one standing in the way of their happiness, it was almost laughable. A part of me wanted to lash out, to scream at him, to demand an explanation. But another part of me, the part that had learned to swallow my frustration over the years, knew that doing so would only give him the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. And I wasn't going to give him that. "Sounds good," I said, my voice even, betraying none of the hurt that churned in my stomach. "I'll figure it out." I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to, but I wasn't about to let him see how much his words were affecting me. For a brief moment, I considered hanging up. The weight of the conversation had shifted, and I knew that whatever came next would change everything. But I stayed on the line. Tyler had made his move. It was time for me to decide mine. His words echoed in my head as I walked toward the elevator. "Nicole deserves better." Funny, I had thought the same thing about myself not that long ago. And yet, here I was, at the center of this mess, left with nothing but the ashes of a life I thought I had built. When I reached my hotel room, I set the phone down, staring at the screen for a long while. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table as if grounding myself in something solid. The shock was still there, a lingering coldness, but underneath it, a fire began to grow. A fire I hadn't felt in years, but one that I was finally ready to let loose. Tyler had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. I picked up the phone again, dialing Chloe's number without thinking. She was a lawyer, yes, but she was also a friend. Someone I knew I could trust to be calm when I wasn't, to see things clearly when I couldn't. "What happened?" Chloe's voice crackled through the phone, immediately shifting to concern. "Tyler sold the apartment. He's divorcing me. And he's already set up his life with someone else. Her sharp intake of breath was enough to confirm that she understood the gravity of the situation. We'll figure this out. Don't worry, she said, her voice solid, determined. Yeah, I replied, my fingers tapping on the table now. But I need to know what my options are. He thinks he's won. He's made a huge mistake. Let's talk tomorrow, Chloe said before hanging up. I stood there, my pulse beginning to slow, my thoughts settling into a pattern. Tyler had thought he could control the situation, that he could just pull the rug out from under me and walk away. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't as helpless as he assumed. Not anymore. The next few hours passed in a blur, the shock of Tyler's words still rattling in my head. I sat in my hotel room, the city skyline stretched out before me, yet I couldn't quite focus on the view. My mind kept returning to the conversation, the apartment, the divorce, Nicole. I had always known, deep down, that things hadn't been right between us, but hearing it from him, the coldness in his voice, the finality of his words, was something I hadn't prepared for. I looked around the room, my gaze drifting to the small details. The unused coffee cup on the table, the clothes I had hastily thrown on the chair that morning. Nothing felt familiar anymore. Nothing felt like it belonged to me. Not even the bed I was supposed to rest in felt like a refuge. Everything had been taken from me so quickly, so decisively, that I couldn't even grasp onto the familiar comforts of my life. And yet, in the back of my mind, I felt a shift, an undeniable sense that I wasn't the one losing. Tyler had done what he always did. He made a decision, and I was left to deal with the fallout. But this time, something in me had snapped. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. Not anymore. The realization settled in slowly. For the past 6 years, I had invested every ounce of myself into our relationship. I had built a life with Tyler, one that I thought was built on trust, on mutual respect, on love. But now, as I stood there in that hotel room, it was all coming undone in a way I could never have predicted. He had sold our home, the place we had worked so hard to make ours, without even a second thought. And not only that, but he was leaving me for another woman, Nicole. A woman who, from the moment he said her name, became the embodiment of everything I had lost. I hadn't wanted to admit it, but the signs had been there all along. The long nights spent at work, the unexplained trips, the growing distance between us. Tyler had become someone I didn't recognize, and now, I was forced to face the truth. He hadn't just been distant, he had been unfaithful. The apartment, the shared life, the promises we made to each other, it all meant nothing to him. I had been nothing more than a convenience, a partner to get him to the next stage of his life, a pawn in his game. And Nicole? She was the prize. I let out a shaky breath, my hands gripping the edge of the window ledge as I stared down at the city below. It was almost as if I could hear Tyler's voice ringing in my ears, his smug tone, his complete lack of empathy. The audacity of it was suffocating, and yet, in the depths of that suffocating pain, a strange clarity began to form. Tyler thought he could erase me. He thought he could walk away without consequences. But what he didn't know was that I had been paying attention. I had been watching closely even when he thought I wasn't. I had never been as naive as he assumed. I had trusted him, yes, but I had also been cautious. And now it was my turn to turn the tables. I reached for my phone and called Chloe, my lawyer and longtime friend. She had always been the calm in the storm, the one I could rely on to think clearly when everything around me seemed to be falling apart. She picked up after the first ring. "Amelia, what happened?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I took a deep breath before speaking, trying to steady myself. "Tyler sold the apartment. He's divorcing me. He's already with Nicole." My words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, as if they didn't belong to me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, he sold the apartment?" Chloe asked, her voice rising with disbelief. "He sold it, Chloe, without my consent. And now he's telling me to figure it out. As if I don't matter. As if none of this means anything." I could almost hear her shaking her head. "Amelia, he can't do that. The apartment is legally yours. You've always had sole ownership of it. He doesn't have the right to sell it, not without your permission. I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark in the chaos. Could it be true? Could Tyler have made such a colossal mistake? I swallowed hard, my voice steady now. He thinks he's won, Chloe. He's laughing about it. But I need to know what I can do. How do I fight back? First, Chloe said, we need to look at the paperwork. I'll handle the legal side, but you need to be prepared. You're not just going to sit back and let him walk away with everything. Not after everything he's done. The determination in her voice was a balm to my frayed nerves. For the first time since I received that call from Tyler, I felt something resembling control. Maybe I couldn't undo what had already been done, but I could make sure Tyler didn't get away with it. Thanks, Chloe, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'll be ready. I hung up, my heart still pounding in my chest. The pain was still there, lingering like a shadow, but it wasn't as consuming as before. It wasn't enough to drown me, because I had a plan, and Tyler didn't even know what was coming. Before I share what happened next, the moment that completely shifted the power balance, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. I spent the rest of the night in a haze, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. It was late by the time I finally turned off the lights, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tyler's face. His smugness, his arrogance, his complete disregard for me. It made my skin crawl. But with each passing minute, I felt something else rise within me, resolve. Tyler had made a grave mistake. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just going to sit back and let him ruin my life. But the truth was, he had underestimated me for far too long. And now it was time for him to learn exactly what it meant to cross me. By morning, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to let him have the final word. Not in this story. The next few days passed in a blur of emotions. Every moment felt like I was moving through a fog, trudging through the motions, pretending to function while my mind raced 1,000 miles ahead. Tyler's words, still ringing in my ears, felt like a heavy weight that I couldn't escape. The apartment was gone. The life I thought I had was slipping through my fingers, and for a moment, I thought I might drown in the chaos. But something had shifted inside me, deep within the core of who I was. And despite the overwhelming sense of loss, that shift began to fuel something else, something stronger. It wasn't the anger I thought it would be. I had expected to seethe with rage, to lash out, to show Tyler just how much his betrayal had wounded me. But what I felt now was something different. It was clarity. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt like the end. Felt like a beginning. Tyler had stolen from me, yes. He had shattered my world. But in doing so, he had unintentionally given me the gift of a clear path forward. I wasn't going to keep playing by his rules. I wasn't going to let him control my next move. I sat at the small desk in my hotel room, the city skyline outside my window serving as a silent reminder that the world was still turning, still moving forward, whether I was ready or not. And that thought alone stirred something within me. I had spent so much of my life trying to make everyone else happy, trying to please Tyler, trying to fit into a life that was never truly mine. I had ignored the cracks in our relationship for so long, convincing myself that it was just a phase. But now those cracks were too large to ignore. Tyler had always believed that I would never leave, that I would always forgive him, no matter how much he pushed me away. He thought I was too weak to stand up for myself. He thought I would just let him get away with everything, just as I always had. But now everything had changed. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I wasn't going to be the passive observer in my own life anymore. The time for forgiveness had passed. This wasn't about salvaging a marriage that had already been broken. It was about taking control back. It was about asserting my worth, my power, my right to choose my own path. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had given up over the years. How much of myself I had sacrificed on the altar of Tyler's wants and needs. It wasn't just the apartment that he had taken from me. It was my voice, my confidence, my sense of self. And while I had spent years convincing myself that it wasn't a big deal, that I could live with the imbalance, I could no longer deny the truth. Tyler had taken everything without ever once considering how it might affect me. He had assumed I would just accept it. Well, not anymore. I thought back to our early years together, when everything had seemed perfect. Tyler had been my world, and I had built mine around him. It was so easy to get lost in the idea of what we could be, the dreams of a life built together. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped being part of those dreams. Somewhere, I had faded into the background, supporting him while my own needs and desires were pushed aside. He never asked me what I wanted. He never took the time to check in with me to see if I was happy. No, it had always been about him. His career, his needs, his plans. And I had let it happen. I had let him take control because I thought that was what love was. I thought that was what a partnership meant. But the truth was, I had allowed myself to become invisible. I had allowed him to dictate the terms of our relationship without ever questioning it. But no more. As the days passed, I felt myself growing stronger. With every conversation, with every passing moment, I became more certain that I could do this. I could stand up for myself. I could fight back. And I wasn't going to do it from a place of desperation or anger. No, I was going to do it from a place of power. Power I had always had but had never fully embraced until now. I thought about the apartment, the home we had built together, the place that had represented everything I had worked for. Tyler thought he could erase me from that life, that he could take everything I had helped create without consequence. But he was wrong. The apartment wasn't just a property. It was a symbol of what we had worked for, of what I had given. It was mine just as much as it was his. And no matter how much he tried to claim ownership, he could never take away the truth. I had helped build that life, and I wasn't going to let him walk away with it. I picked up my phone and called Chloe. I needed to hear from her, needed to know that I wasn't imagining this power shift, that there was a way forward. "Chloe," I said when she answered, my voice calm, clear. "We need to move fast. Tyler thinks he's gotten away with it, but he hasn't. I need to make sure he understands just how wrong he is." Her voice was firm, unwavering. "We'll take care of it. I've already looked into the paperwork, and you're right, the apartment is still legally yours. He can't just sell it without your consent. You have every right to fight back." I felt a rush of relief wash over me. Finally, someone who saw me for who I truly was. Not the person Tyler had tried to mold me into, not the passive bystander, but the woman who had the power to take back control. "Good," I said. "Let's do it." I hung up, my mind racing with plans, with ideas. I had a new mission now. This wasn't just about the apartment or the divorce. This was about reclaiming everything I had lost, the trust one had given away, the sense of self that had been buried under years of neglect. It was about taking back my life, my dignity, my future. Before I share how things would change in ways I never expected, I want to hear from you, my incredible viewers. Have you ever had to reclaim something that was taken from you? Whether it's your confidence, your career, or your own happiness, I want to know. Drop a comment and let me know how you fought back. And if you're feeling empowered by this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Trust me, the best part is yet to come. The more I thought about the path ahead, the clearer it became. I had the upper hand now. I wasn't just fighting for the apartment, I was fighting for my life. And this time I was in control. This wasn't a fight I was going to lose. Tyler had underestimated me, but that was about to change. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I could feel the tide of control shifting beneath me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was the one driving the narrative. No more sitting in the backseat of my own life while Tyler called the shots. It was my turn to take charge, and I wasn't going to waste a second. The apartment was only the beginning. There was much more at stake now. My dignity, my future, and my freedom. I woke up early the next morning, my thoughts racing as I prepared for what would be the first of many legal steps. The plan was clear now. Tyler had made his move, but I was prepared to make mine. I had no intention of letting him get away with his deceit. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much he had underestimated me. He thought he could sell our home out from under me and walk away with a clean slate, but he had overlooked one crucial detail. The apartment deed had been in my name for months. It was something Tyler had never bothered to check, something he had never cared to read the fine print about. And now that ignorance was going to cost him everything. I called Chloe again, my lawyer and trusted friend, the one who had always been there to keep me grounded, to guide me through the rough patches of life. She picked up on the first ring, and I could hear the calm assurance in her voice, a voice that had always given me a sense of peace. But today, there was a different energy in me, something that matched her calm with my own resolve. Chloe, it's time to move forward. Tyler thinks he's already won, but he hasn't. We need to take action now. She was quiet for a moment, but I could hear the smile in her voice when she spoke again. I'm glad to hear you're ready. I've already looked over everything, and you're in a strong position. The deed's been in your name for months, right? Right? I said, the words feeling even more significant as they left my lips. I had it transferred after the refinance. He doesn't know, but I do. He never checked the paperwork, and now it's going to be his downfall. You're absolutely right, Chloe confirmed, her tone firm. We'll notify the buyer and inform them that the sale isn't legal. And we'll draft a letter for Tyler, outlining the consequences of what he's done. The fraud angle is clear, and we'll make sure he knows exactly what he's facing. I felt a surge of something powerful course through me. Relief, determination, and the sweet taste of victory that was finally within reach. Tyler had thought he could play the system, take what was mine without any repercussions. But in reality, it was his own ignorance that had left him exposed. The deed, the paperwork, the contracts, all of it pointed to me. I wasn't just his wife. I was the rightful owner of that apartment. He had no claim to it, and now he would have to face the consequences of his arrogance. Let's do it, I said, my voice steady now, each word a declaration. Let's take him down. Chloe laughed lightly, the sound of it comforting. I've been waiting for you to say that. I'll handle the legal side, but you need to be prepared. This isn't going to be a walk in the park. Tyler's going to fight back, but he won't win. I'm ready, I said, my resolve hardening. I'm not going to back down. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the morning gathering everything I needed: documents, old emails, evidence of Tyler's neglect. I didn't want to leave anything to chance. Tyler had already underestimated me, but now I had a new sense of clarity. I wasn't just fighting for an apartment or for money. I was fighting for my own sense of self-worth, for the part of me that Tyler had taken for granted for far too long. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. It was about standing up for myself in ways I never had before. Later that afternoon, Chloe called me with an update. We've sent the notification to the buyer. They were surprised, to say the least, but they understand the situation. They've agreed to cooperate, which works in our favor. Good, I said, a sense of relief washing over me. What about Tyler? His response has been exactly what I expected, Chloe said, a hint of amusement in her voice. He's furious, but he's not stupid. He knows he can't hide behind his ignorance forever. We're going to give him one chance to settle this out of court. If he's foolish enough to keep pushing, we'll take him to court. I've already got the paperwork ready. I could almost hear the confidence in Chloe's voice. She was always one step ahead, always prepared. And that sense of preparation, that feeling of being in control, was something I was beginning to embrace for myself. I'll make sure he knows that I'm not backing down, I said, my tone cold now. The idea of Tyler's arrogance infuriated me, but I couldn't let my emotions rule me. This was a game of strategy, and I was going to play it to win. Over the next few days, the pace of things quickened. Chloe and I worked together to finalize the paperwork, sending Tyler a formal letter outlining the legal ramifications of his actions. I remember the moment the letter was sent, my finger hovering over the send button as I prepared to release the final blow. In a way, it felt like sending the final word in a conversation I had never agreed to have. The days that followed were a strange mix of anticipation and calm. Tyler's reaction was just as I expected: angry, defensive, and filled with the same arrogance that had always characterized him. He tried calling, leaving messages that ranged from pleading to threatening, but I refused to take the bait. I wasn't going to engage with him. Not now. Not when I was so close to the finish line. Every time his name flashed on my phone screen, I felt a flicker of annoyance, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of power. I had the upper hand now, and Tyler knew it. He just didn't want to admit it. As the days passed, I focused on what I could control. My next steps, my future, my life. The apartment, the divorce, the legal fight, those were just the external battles. The real fight was internal, and every day, I felt myself growing stronger. Tyler had tried to tear me down, but all he had succeeded in doing was forcing me to rise. He had underestimated me, and now he was going to see exactly what I was made of. Before I share what happened next, when Tyler realized just how wrong he had been, I want to hear from you, my incredible viewers. Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours? Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they could control you? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. This story is far from over, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The legal side was almost in place now. The paperwork had been filed, the buyer had been notified, and Tyler had been served notice. He could no longer hide behind his lies or his ignorance. The power had shifted, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. And this time, I would be the one calling the shots. Tyler showed up at the apartment that evening, his face twisted with a mix of disbelief and rage. I had expected his reaction, of course, but seeing it up close, in person, felt like the final confirmation that everything was about to change. The door slammed open with such force that the walls seemed to shake, and there he stood, just as arrogant as ever, but this time, his bravado felt brittle. He was holding his phone in one hand, the screen flashing with notifications, his eyes darting around the room like a man trying to find an escape from the reality he'd created. I was already standing in the living room, my arms crossed in front of me, watching him with a steady gaze. I didn't flinch, didn't flounder under his presence. No, this time I was ready. This time I had the upper hand. "Amelia," he snapped, his voice sharp and angry. "What the hell is this? What's going on? You think you can just take the apartment from me?" His words were full of venom, but there was a tremor beneath them, an unease that I hadn't heard from him before. Tyler had always been the one in control, always the one to dictate the terms of our lives. But now everything had shifted. I wasn't backing down, not now, not ever again. "I'm not taking anything from you, Tyler," I replied calmly, my voice smooth but firm. "I'm just standing up for myself, something I should have done a long time ago." He scoffed, running a hand through his disheveled hair, the smugness in his expression turning to something darker, more desperate. "Don't act like this is some moral high ground. You think you're in the right here? You're being ridiculous, Amelia. This apartment, this life, it's mine just as much as it's yours. You can't just throw me out like this." I took a step forward, my gaze never leaving his. "I didn't throw you out, Tyler. You chose to leave. You chose to sell the apartment behind my back. You made that decision, not me." The words rolled off my tongue with a calmness that shocked even me. But underneath that calm was a fury, a quiet storm that had been building for months, years even. And now it was about to break free. Tyler's face hardened, his eyes narrowing with a flicker of anger. "You think you've won, don't you? You think because you found some loophole that suddenly you're the one calling the shots. You don't have a clue what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, my voice steady. "You thought you could take everything from me, Tyler. You thought you could sell our home and walk away with no consequences. But that's not how this works. Not anymore. I'm not going to let you manipulate me any longer." He let out a harsh laugh, but it was laced with bitterness. "Nicole and I are moving forward, Amelia. We're building a life. You're just trying to drag me down because you can't accept it." The mention of her name, of course, stung. But it wasn't the first time I had heard it. I had known about Nicole long before he ever admitted it, and while the betrayal had hurt, it had also given me clarity. It had shown me just how much I had been willing to overlook, just how much I had been willing to sacrifice in the name of trying to save something that wasn't worth saving. But I wasn't that person anymore. I'm not dragging you down, Tyler. I'm taking control of my own life, I said, my voice low and controlled. You had no respect for me, no respect for the life we built together. You thought you could treat me like I was nothing. But I'm not nothing. And I'm not letting you walk away with everything. Tyler took a few steps forward, his posture aggressive now. You think I'm afraid of you? You think you've won some battle here? You're nothing but a fool, Amelia. You're going to regret this. I promise you. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. No, Tyler. What you don't understand is that I've been living in regret for too long. I've been living in the shadows of your lies, and I'm done. I'm done letting you call the shots. This is my home and it's my life. And if you think you're going to intimidate me into giving it all up, you're mistaken. The silence between us was thick, the tension palpable. For a moment, Tyler seemed to pause, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He was calculating, trying to find a way to regain control of the situation. But he couldn't. Not this time. You're just going to kick me out, huh? Like I'm some stranger. He was fuming now, his voice shaking with rage. Not like a stranger, Tyler, I said, taking another step closer. The words coming out with the weight of everything I had been holding back for so long. You're leaving because you broke something that couldn't be fixed. You've taken everything from me for too long. And now you're going to see what happens when you push me too far. He stared at me, his face a mixture of confusion, fury, and disbelief. I could see him processing what I was saying, his mind scrambling to catch up with the reality of the situation. He had always believed that I would just take whatever he handed me, that I would bend to his will, that I would allow him to dictate the terms of our lives. But not anymore. Fine, he finally spat, his voice full of venom. You really want to do this? You think you can just toss me aside like I'm nothing? You think you've got the upper hand? We'll see who's laughing when this all falls apart. His words were empty threats, desperate attempts to salvage his ego, and I wasn't about to let them sway me. You can keep pretending like you're the victim, Tyler, I said, my voice cool and unwavering. But the truth is, you're the one who ruined this. You're the one who betrayed me, and you're the one who's going to pay the price. For a moment, he didn't speak. The rage in his eyes was still there, but there was something else now, a flicker of doubt. The reality of what was happening was sinking in, and for the first time, Tyler was starting to realize that he had underestimated me. That I wasn't the same woman who had been content to sit by and watch him control everything. I had fought for too long to just give up now. I'm not the one who's going to lose here, Tyler, I said, taking one last step toward him. You are, because no matter what happens next, I'm walking away from this a winner. You're just going to have to deal with the consequences of your own actions. Tyler didn't respond immediately. He stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, as if weighing his options, trying to decide whether to make one last move. But he didn't. He didn't speak, didn't threaten me again. He just stood there, seething in silence, the weight of the situation finally catching up with him. And then, without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out. No more yelling, no more fighting, just the sound of his footsteps fading away as he left the apartment. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, my body tense with adrenaline. But even as the door clicked shut behind him, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had done it. I had stood my ground. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally free. The days after the confrontation with Tyler were some of the most intense of my life. My mind was racing, a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. I had finally stood up to him, finally said the things I had kept bottled up for so long. But even as I felt a sense of relief, I knew that what came next was the real test. Tyler was not the type to give up easily. He would fight, of that I was certain. But what I hadn't expected was the depth of his desperation, or how quickly his carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. It started with the calls. Endless, frantic voicemails from Tyler, each one more frantic than the last. He called me everything from irrational to vindictive, accusing me of ruining his life, of making everything difficult. At first, I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew that whatever he said wouldn't change anything. The truth was, I had already made my peace with the situation. I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. But as the calls continued, as the days stretched into a week, I couldn't help but notice the shift. There was no longer any smugness in his voice, no hint of the arrogance he had carried with him for so long. What replaced it was something else entirely. Fear. Fear of losing everything. Fear of the consequences of his own actions. It was almost sad to witness, but I couldn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. I continued on with my life. Chloe and I were making progress with the legal side of things. We had sent him notice of the fraudulent sale, and Tyler's lawyer had responded with the same deflection, the same empty promises of negotiation. But Chloe wasn't having it. She was determined, and I was determined right alongside her. The apartment was mine, legally and emotionally, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Not Tyler, not anyone. Tyler's calls grew more erratic, but it was the texts that really started to reveal his unraveling. First, it was a few pleading messages, asking me to talk, to meet him in person to discuss things. He offered apologies, promises of change. Then, the tone shifted. He began threatening me, claiming that if I pushed things too far, he would make my life miserable. That he could make the legal proceedings drag on for years, that he would fight me at every step. But the most telling part of it all wasn't the threats. It was the pleading. It was the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide beneath layers of anger and pride. He wanted me to feel guilty. He wanted me to second-guess myself, to question whether I was being too harsh. But I had already made up my mind. I knew what I needed to do, and I wasn't going to let his manipulation sway me. I finally replied, sending him a simple text. "You made your choice. Now deal with the consequences." That was it. It wasn't an angry reply. It wasn't even a vindictive one. It was just the truth. The truth that he had made a series of choices that led us to this point, and now he had to face the consequences of those choices. I didn't need to say anything else. I didn't need to try to convince him. The ball was in his court, and he had already played his hand. The following days were a blur of legal proceedings, emails, and documentation. But as the legal battles began to take shape, I saw something I hadn't expected. Tyler started to panic. He had made the mistake of thinking he could control the situation, of thinking that his charisma and confidence would carry him through. But now the reality was setting in. The buyer, who had initially agreed to purchase the apartment, had backed out once they were made aware of the fraud. They had demanded their money back and threatened legal action against Tyler for his involvement in a fraudulent transaction. Suddenly, the walls were closing in on him, and the image of invincibility he had built around himself began to crack. I remember the first time I saw him after that, the day he showed up at my door, looking more like a shell of the man I had once known. His posture was slumped, his face pale, the confident smile he used to wear nowhere to be found. He looked older, smaller. It was like watching someone who had been defeated by their own arrogance, their own pride. "Amelia," he said, his voice hoarse, unsure. "We need to talk." I stood there for a moment watching him, trying to assess the situation. It was clear that whatever sense of control he had once had was slipping away. He wasn't the same man who had walked out of this apartment weeks ago, full of pride and certainty. This Tyler was different. He was no longer the man who thought he could get away with anything. He was a man who had been forced to face the consequences of his actions, and he wasn't handling it well. "I don't think there's anything left to talk about," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've already made your choice, Tyler. You've already crossed a line, and now you're going to have to face the consequences." He looked at me, his eyes pleading, but there was no longer any conviction in his gaze. "I didn't know. Okay? I didn't know the apartment was in your name. I thought I was doing what was best for us, for our future." The words came out in a rush, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. But it was too late for excuses. I had seen through his lies long ago. This wasn't about a misunderstanding or a mistake. This was about his complete disregard for me, for our relationship, and for the life we had built together. You didn't know? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You signed the papers, Tyler. You signed everything without reading it. You never bothered to ask. That's not a mistake, that's negligence. And now you're going to deal with the fallout. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said, his voice cracking with frustration. I thought I could fix everything. I thought I could make it right. You can't fix what you broke, Tyler, I said, my voice hardening. You can't undo the damage you've done. There was a moment of silence between us, the weight of the words hanging in the air. Tyler was visibly struggling, his emotions shifting from anger to guilt to desperation. I could see the cracks in his facade now. The man who had always been so confident, so sure of his ability to manipulate and control everything, was unraveling before me. The walls he had built around himself were coming down, and for the first time, I saw him for what he truly was. A man who had spent too long believing he could get away with anything. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice softer now. I didn't realize how much I hurt you. I didn't know how much you meant to me until it was too late. I didn't respond right away. The apology was hollow, empty. It wasn't enough. It was too late for apologies. I had spent too long trying to make things work, trying to convince myself that we could fix it. But the truth was, Tyler had never truly seen me. He had never truly understood the depth of my feelings, the strength I had kept hidden for so long. I don't want your apology, Tyler, I said quietly. I don't need it. What I need is for you to own your mistakes. And that means facing the consequences of your actions. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I could see the gears turning in his mind as he tried to come to terms with everything that had happened. But I knew, deep down, that this was the beginning of the end for him. The man I had known was gone, and in his place was someone who was realizing just how badly he had lost. I watched him turn and walk away, his steps heavy with defeat. It was over. The facade had crumbled. The mighty had fallen. And for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of peace. Tyler had made his choices. He had pushed me too far, taken too much, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. And as I closed the door behind him, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The days after Tyler's collapse were a strange mix of relief and quiet strength. For so long, I had been held captive by the expectations of others, by the need to fix things, to make everything right, to hold on to something that was never meant to stay together. Now, though, a new sense of clarity settled over me. It wasn't just the sense of victory over Tyler. It was something deeper, more profound. I wasn't just reclaiming an apartment or fighting for what was mine. I was reclaiming my life, my sense of self. In the weeks that followed, I found myself waking up with a new perspective. The mornings felt different. There was no longer a heavy weight on my chest, no anxiety about what was coming next. The apartment was mine, yes, but it was more than that. It had become a symbol of my own strength, a place where I could finally breathe and begin to rebuild. Not just my living space, but myself. The first time I walked through the apartment after Tyler had left, it felt like a different place entirely. The air was clearer, lighter. His things were still there, scattered across the room. His jackets draped over the chair, his shoes half-heartedly discarded by the door. But they didn't belong to me anymore. They were relics of a past I was no longer tied to. I went through the apartment slowly, picking up pieces, organizing them into boxes, each item a reminder of the man I thought I knew. It was strange to be so detached from it all, to see everything so clearly. But it wasn't sadness that filled me. It was a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons learned, for the growth that had come from pain, and for the freedom that I had fought so hard to claim. I began to redecorate, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't about making the place look new. It was about making it mine. I rearranged the furniture, moved my favorite pieces of art into places that felt right, and filled the shelves with books I hadn't touched in years. It was a process of filling the space with things that reflected who I had become, who I was now, and not the woman I used to be, the one who had been defined by someone else's actions. I spent the next few weeks throwing out the old, both physically and emotionally. I threw out clothes that reminded me of Tyler, not because I hated them, but because they no longer fit the person I was becoming. I took down the framed photo of us from our wedding day and tucked it away in a drawer, where it wouldn't stare back at me with false promises of a life that no longer existed. The woman in those photos wasn't me anymore. I wasn't that naive person who had blindly followed someone else's path. No, I was stronger now, clearer about my worth, and determined to live a life that was truly mine. The legal battle continued, of course. Tyler hadn't given up, and neither had I, but it didn't feel as daunting as it once had. The truth was on my side, and every time I spoke to Chloe or received updates from her, I felt more and more confident that I was going to win. Tyler's threats and empty promises no longer rattled me. I was no longer afraid of him, no longer afraid of losing what I had worked so hard to build. The only thing I feared now was losing myself again. But that was a fear that faded with every step I took in this new chapter of my life. I started focusing more on my work, pouring my energy into things that brought me joy and fulfillment. For the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating. I stopped putting others first at the expense of my own well-being. I began to make time for the things that truly mattered. My friends, my passions, my own growth. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected over the years, people who had always seen me for who I was, not who I was with. They were a reminder of the woman I had once been, the woman I was now rediscovering. One evening, as I sat in the living room with a glass of wine, Lauren, my best friend, came by. She had been with me through the darkest moments of the past few months, offering her support, her wisdom, and her unwavering belief that I would come out stronger. "You look different," she said, settling onto the couch next to me. "I don't know what it is, but you look free." I smiled, a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes. "I think I am," I replied, taking a sip of my wine. "I'm finally starting to feel like myself again." We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the weight of everything that had happened settling between us. I didn't need to explain the journey I had been on. Lauren had been there every step of the way, and she knew exactly how far I had come. "You're not just surviving, you know?" she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're thriving. You've gone through hell, and now you're here, stronger than ever. It's not just about the apartment, is it?" "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "It's about me. It's about taking control of my life again. It's about not letting anyone else dictate my worth or my happiness." Lauren's eyes softened, and she reached over to squeeze my hand. "I'm so proud of you, Em. You've come so far." And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just about the apartment or even about Tyler. It was about me, about reclaiming the pieces of myself that I had lost. It was about standing in the light after so many years of living in the shadows. It was about the strength to finally say enough is enough. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings, but it no longer felt like a battle I was losing. Every letter sent, every document filed, brought me closer to closure. Chloe and I kept pushing forward, but it was different now. The stakes were no longer as high. I had already won the most important battle. I had won back my life. Tyler, of course, didn't take this lying down. His calls became more frantic, more desperate, but they were no longer directed at me. His lawyer started calling Chloe, asking for negotiations, asking for a settlement. But by then, it didn't matter. I was no longer interested in negotiating with someone who had shown me nothing but contempt for so long. The moment he sold the apartment behind my back was the moment I stopped seeing him as the man I had once loved and started seeing him for who he really was. A man who would do anything to avoid facing the consequences of his actions. It didn't matter anymore. I was ready to move on. I was ready to step into the future that had always been waiting for me. A future without Tyler, without the fear, without the constant need to prove myself to someone who didn't deserve my energy. And as the final documents were signed, as the court proceedings were wrapped up, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The weight that had once pressed down on my shoulders, the fear that had paralyzed me, was gone. Tyler's chapter was closed, and now it was time for me to write my own. I stood at the window one evening, watching the sunset over the city. The view was beautiful, but it wasn't the view that captivated me. It was the woman in the reflection, standing tall, free, and finally at peace with herself. I had fought for this life, for this peace, and no one, least of all Tyler, could ever take it away from me. The woman who had been broken was no more. The woman who had risen from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever, was standing here, ready to take on whatever came next. And for the first time in years, I knew that whatever that was, I would be ready for it. I had finally found myself again. And this time I wasn't going anywhere. The finality of everything settled in slowly, like a fog lifting after a storm. The legal battles had been long and exhausting, but they were over now. Tyler had signed the divorce papers, and the fraud charges were officially dismissed, but the settlement had been reached. He had tried to fight to hold on to something he no longer deserved, but in the end, it was clear that the real fight wasn't just about property or legal rights. It was about the battle for my own peace of mind. The day I officially signed the papers was the day I realized something profound. It wasn't relief I felt, nor anger, nor even satisfaction. It was freedom, pure and simple. Tyler was no longer a part of my life, not legally, not emotionally. He had no claim over me anymore, and neither did the ghost of our past. I had expected this moment to feel more dramatic, more emotionally charged, but instead, it felt quiet. In that silence, I felt the weight of all those years spent fighting for a love that wasn't returned, all those years spent questioning my own worth. They didn't matter anymore. They had shaped who I was, yes, but they didn't define me. And now, I was finally free to move forward without that baggage. I remember the first time I sat in the apartment after all the dust had settled. The place looked different, not just because I had rearranged a few things or redecorated the space, but because it felt different. It felt like mine, not just the walls or the furniture, but the space I had created within myself. I had taken control of my narrative, and that was something no one could take away from me. It was a strange feeling, this freedom. At times, it felt like the calm after a storm, and at others like a vast open sky, full of potential, full of possibilities. The next morning, after the final legalities were done, I woke up early, my body still adjusting to the peace that now surrounded me. I got out of bed, stretched, and walked over to the window, just as I had so many times before. The city outside was waking up, the morning light casting a soft glow over everything. But this time it felt different. This time I wasn't just observing the world. I was a part of it, ready to step forward into whatever came next. I had come to realize that I didn't need closure from Tyler. I had expected it, even craved it at times, but now I understood that closure wasn't something he could give me. It was something I had to give myself. The apology, the explanation, the grand gestures I had imagined, all of those were unnecessary. The truth was simple. I had given him everything I had to give, and he had taken it for granted. I had nothing more to offer him. What I had left now was for me, and that was enough. The next few days were filled with a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't felt in years. I spent time with my friends, took a day to explore the city, and allowed myself to enjoy the simple things. I started rediscovering the hobbies I had set aside for far too long. Reading, cooking, even just taking long walks in the park, enjoying the sound of the wind in the trees. For the first time in so long, I wasn't weighed down by the constant pressure to fix things, to make everyone else happy. I wasn't living in the shadow of a relationship that had never truly been healthy. I was finally living for myself. Lauren came over one afternoon, bringing her usual energy and laughter with her. We sat on the couch, sipping coffee, talking about everything and nothing. It felt good to laugh again, to let go of the past and just be present in the moment. I realized how much I had missed these simple moments, how much I had put them on hold while I was busy trying to save something that wasn't worth saving. You know, Lauren said, her voice thoughtful. I think you're finally starting to let go. I nodded, taking a deep breath. I think I am too. It wasn't that I had never let go of the past before. I had, in bits and pieces. But now it was different. Now I wasn't just letting go of Tyler. I was letting go of everything he had made me believe about myself. I was letting go of the woman I used to be, the one who was always trying to please everyone else, the one who was afraid of standing up for herself, the one who thought she needed someone else to define her worth. That woman didn't exist anymore. I had spent so much of my life trying to hold on to something, trying to fix something that was never meant to be fixed. But now I understood that some things just weren't worth saving. And in letting go, I had found freedom. Tyler tried to reach out a few more times, but by then, I was done. His messages were full of guilt, of desperate attempts to bring me back into his world. But I had already closed that chapter. There was nothing left for me there. He had lost me when he sold the apartment without even a second thought, when he decided that our years together meant so little to him. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I just didn't care. And that, in itself, was its own form of freedom. I stopped responding to his texts. I blocked his number. And with each passing day, I felt the grip he once had on me loosen. It wasn't that I wanted to hurt him. It wasn't about revenge. It was simply that I had nothing left to give him. I had given him my trust, my love, my loyalty, and he had taken it all and thrown it away. There was nothing left to say. As the months went by, I started to notice changes in myself. I was more confident, more assertive. I no longer second-guessed myself or apologized for the things that mattered to me. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or validation. I was no longer afraid to speak up, to take charge, to make decisions that were best for me. I was finally living my truth, and that was something I had never fully experienced until now. The apartment began to feel like more than just a place to live. It became a symbol of everything I had fought for. Every time I walked into that space, I was reminded of the journey I had been on. I had fought for this space, for my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The walls held my memories, but they also held my strength. And as I rearranged the furniture once again, this time to make room for new memories, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the future. I wasn't worried about what might happen next or what anyone else might think. I was ready to embrace whatever came my way, knowing that I had the strength to face it. I had reclaimed my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even Tyler, take that from me again. And when I looked at myself in the mirror now, I saw a woman who was no longer broken. I saw a woman who was whole, who had fought for herself and had won. And that was enough. It was more than enough. Tyler may have tried to break me, but in the end, he only made me stronger. The woman I was now was a woman who no longer needed anyone's approval, who no longer feared standing on her own. I had found my strength. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. I was free, and I was ready for whatever came next.